12 May 2022. Good morning, 12 May 2022. And or good afternoon, good evening, depends on what time you watch my official YouTube video. So I decided to do a bit of a different outfit today. I did. I kind of figured that it would be more ideal for this particular official YouTube video of mine. So make sure to go to my website, www.susanmealing.com. Subscribe to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to like my official YouTube videos. Share my official YouTube video links. And if you're going to leave a comment, please do make sure to have etiquette and respect. So I kind of figured this kind of outfit that I came up with about 5 minutes ago seemed a little apropos for this particular official YouTube video. So for a quick little background, I was raised by a female, my biological mother, who had worked at Prudential in New Jersey in the 1980s and 1990s doing information technology in that broad spectrum before it became specialized. Then she, in the 1990s to the early 2000s, had also worked as an information technology software engineer, similar sort of overall aspect, in Woodstock, Illinois, at the McHenry County Government Center. And so while she worked at Prudential in New Jersey, the 1980s and 1990s, as a child growing up with that, and the time frame from March of 2020 onward to about now in 2022, people who have had children that live with them that are school age have that understanding as to how much assistance that I had at that time, depending on. For those in reference to the 2020 election, that you had some assistance in reference to your children. If you had that for the phone calls, that would be the reference as to what I dealt with as a child in a different capacity, okay? So, but that's also because of the COVID situation, so on and so forth. So my biological father had attended and had been certified by the School of Bulova and was capable to work on Bulova watches and Seikos, the high-end ones, and Rolexes, Movados, those particular specialty watches that are understood. He also worked on grandfather and grandmother clocks, and all those, he was that level of repair. Because those who know how, more specifically, so he had also worked on those German-style clocks that have all the little intricate what-have-yous. He knew how to fix and repair those as well, and certify gemstones. So that's what I was raised by in the tri-state area of New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. So if you had one of those specialty carved wall clocks that sometimes are from here to here, and then they have like the little dangly whatever. No offense, those clocks are really annoying. But hey, sure, there are some people who like them. When you grow up in a house that has a room full of small watches, you know, the wristwatches and the pocket watches, and you just hear the clicking from that, it's a little annoying by a lot. And then, you know, when you have the grandmother and grandfather clocks and they randomly whatever, and you hear the gears as well because they're grandmother and grandfather clocks, that's a little bit of it. And then you have these little carved situations that have these little dancing whatevers and little birds that pop out and all that sort of, that was my childhood. Yeah, don't be jealous. I've had people tell me that they're jealous of me for different reasons, and it's like, I don't believe you. If you knew what it took for me to be me, I guarantee you wouldn't ever be jealous of anything that I have ever done. Like, there's nothing that you could be envious to a degree of the experience, but you cannot ever truthfully say that you were jealous, because you would at some point in time come to the understanding that in order for me to be capable to accomplish whatever it was, this is the starting point. And so I had a bunch of females, most specifically, who were like, no, it can't be that bad. And it's like, yeah, no, except you'd have to have my childhood. And I don't think you could even stand a day in my childhood. Then there's my teenage years, and that's before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, I promise. If you had any intelligence, you would not ever be jealous at all. And some females had made the comment that they thought that no matter what, and I informed them there would be a day where they would not. They would not ever have that ever. And so this is my childhood. So the walls, as far as the desk area where my biological father, Mike, had, so for those who knows what a secretary desk looks like, but then like the drawer pull out and the stuff like that, those were all watches, wrist watches and pocket watches. Just, this huge section that's essentially the end of the door to the end of this door, wide and tall up to the ceiling, and the little paper bags of the different watches. Some of those paper bags had more than one watch in them, and so you have all that, and then these drawers with the tools and stuff like that. That's just the area right next to where my crib was. That's just that area. As a child, an infant, starting point, by the way. And so then, the grandmother and the grandfather clocks, and then the wall clocks that have the doohickey mabobs of little houses, and, the little dancing music and all that, every hour. But that was, for the ones that were on time, because then there were the ones that, because he was a repairer, so, they just randomly go off. And then there was my biological mother's little mechanical clowns that creeped me out. Think about that when you take in consideration the room right next to my crib, okay? So my crib was in the room next door to all these clocks and what have you. But the clowns that my biological mother liked creeped me out more. So just think about that. I don't know if that might be frightening to some people when they really, really think about it, but it might be a really good metaphor at this point in time. So, that creeped me out. The room full of watches and clocks that was annoying. That was just very, oh, there's the music for that one, whatever, in comparison to these porcelain clowns that, randomly the music would turn on and it was slow and just was a creepy whatever. But the room full of clocks were like, okay, well, that's, and so don't be jealous. It's just every minute, or I should clarify, every second of every minute of every hour of every day of every week, of every month, of every year of my childhood, from the time that I was, in my crib, all the way through to when I was about 13 and a half years old. That's the room next to my crib. And then I don't know if this makes it better or worse, because, my biological sister is 4 years younger than me. So, for about 7, 8, or 9 years, I have to share the room where where my crib was when I had whatever, until Mike had moved his watches, and then that was my room. The watch and jewelry location was my room when I got my own room. So again, okay, yay, got my own room. Except, you know, I still have the fact that my biological sister, as far as whatever, however, I get my own room. It just so happens to be the room with all of the clocks and the watches and jewelry pieces. Woohoo! And those who know, my biological father smoked cigarettes, Lucky Strike, no filter, and Pall Mall, no filter. So, you know, there were just some clocks on the wall. If you don't know what that looks as, for those who have furniture in their apartment and or house, and then, you know, they move out and they see like the perfect location of where that couch was, where there, you know, nothing impacted, and then you see the rest of the carpet around it. That's kind of like that, but the walls. And so, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. That's awesome. Okay, but smoke, you know, so okay, that's my childhood into my teenage years, literally. And so, but also more so the physical remnants of where these clocks were on the wall. Because it was organized in regards of, okay, well, this clock with this doohickey mabob of these whatchamacallits, don't be jealous, okay? All right, so that's my childhood, that's my teenage years. And so in my defense, I think I came out pretty, you know, for that childhood. I think I came out fairly normal-ish, you know, or I should say well-adjusted in comparison, because how many people would be capable to grow up with that? And that's just the room, that's not the people. That's also not the grounds of the house that I grew up, you know, in. And then there's Old Town Presbyterian Church. So in my defense, where some people might be like, oh, whatever, well, you know, in comparison, I may be biased. However, and if I come across as arrogant, well, my apologies. But this is the first time in 2022 where I'm like, I think that compared to everything of that, you know, I mean, you know, maybe I could be, you know, difficult when it comes to certain things. However, in my defense, in comparison to growing up with that, you know, I would think that I might be far more well-adjusted than some might in other references. And so, you know, I mean, if you can handle listening to that, remember, for years, over a decade, I was 13 and a half, and I finally got my own room. That's all. Just heard that for 13 and a half years. Every moment in the house. Because anybody who's ever lived in a house with more than one clock in that capacity, you know what that is. Well, it's the whole room. So there's all of these watches, you know, different wrist watches, different pocket watches, different grandmother and grandfather clocks, regular clocks, and then these doohickey mabobs with the whatevers and dancing little pieces and stuff like that. Shelves of them in certain areas. You know, it's a whole room. It was about, I think it was like 15 by 20, just that amount. And then anybody who's seen Mike's garage in regards of San Antonio, just think of that with watches and clocks. It's my childhood. And remember, he was the only one who went into his jewelry area, and so he didn't, so for those who know how he had been about the garage in San Antonio, which is nothing compared to the garage and basement in Illinois, which obviously would be nothing compared to the 5-car garage with the shed attached, the full basement, and then this particular room full of clocks and watches. So, but for that reference, it doesn't really matter because it's still all of those whatever with all of those clocks and watches in that size of the area. So that's what I grew up with. So just think of how big the average size of a pocket watch and a wristwatch is. He put them in these different envelopes so he could always, be organized in this different capacity. And that's, just throughout this whole room with these other clocks. I don't know what some people might think, because I've been told that I need more patience a lot of times, and it's one of those, I have this memory and it's like, okay, but I'm alive. So I think I have patience because I survived this being in the room next to where my crib was as an infant and a toddler. And then where, as I got my bed, it was still there. And so I think, in my defense, growing up with that, and then later having Patricia show up and that, I think that, I'm, in comparison, I did pretty good, until I finally got my own room and was like, no, stay away, go away. Just saying, like, maybe somebody could be like, wow, yeah, you might have a little bit more patience than possibly most. Depending on how many minutes, of how many hours, of how many days, of how many weeks, of how many years you would be capable to deal with that. Otherwise, whatever. And so, don't be jealous. So, I know how in a few weeks, because today is the 12th of May, 2022, there's this merger, okay? And so this is kind of where this metaphor of actualities is. So my biological mother worked at Prudential. I was capable to do coding with that, and those particular factors. From the 1980s into the 1990s, there were certain mergers as far as company mergers. So you have Windows, you have Apple, you have Macintosh, you have Compaq, you have HP, you have Intel, you have AMDI, you have, what are the other, and that's just a few things in those references. You have IBM, you have DOS, you have Pentium, I think I said Pentium. You have, and then it just all these different, and that's just computers, okay? So then you have landline and landline phones with the cell phones that were coming out at the same time, but you also had satellite television and cable television. So you had that going on, and so that's in the 1980s, before you get into the 1990s. Okay, and so when you get into the 1990s, you do have a little bit more of that, and it continues progressing with all those different situations. Now then, when you get from the 1990s into the 2000s, in 1997-ish into 2000, you have the Y2K coding. And in 1997, it wasn't as well known. Only certain people knew about Y2K. 1997. Hi. So then there's 1998, and a few more learned about Y2K. And then 1999, and everybody learned about Y2K because of the combination of, but there was so much detail about Y2K that you had to know a few things before you would actually be capable to understand. And so 10 Commandments are really important, because if you have that understanding from that knowledge, well, you have that understanding from that knowledge. And so in 2019, I began my updating in reference to my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmeeling.com. And in this updating, there were a lot of clarifications and verifications that I thought were important to put into as swiftly but also as correctly as possible. Now, I acknowledge the years and the dates as far as certain situations being, well, during the update in the year of 2019, I had to readjust to the energetic situations because I had wound up above the Mason-Dixon line. I was in Washington State. I was working on my Medal of Honor art project, and in order to clarify the different time frames, that took a bit because of the electrical situation to differences as well as the actual energetic differences per state. That's not forgetting the electrical differences per state as far as the electronic wires. So all sorts of people may have whatever opinions if they don't have the background or knowledge or understanding of the most intricacies of. If you don't have that knowledge because you are not old enough, it's before your time, or you got into only certain areas of technology in comparison to others, because you can't just be in software or just hardware, you have to be in both to have this knowledge. So if you're not with a background of both hardware and software, as I do, you kind of have no idea. And so in regards of 2019 into 2020 and 2021, I made attempts. And for whatever, people made whatever choices they made. That's not my fault, that's their fault. Because you have to take in consideration the merger. So there were commercials that were out at the time that were discussing the T-Mobile Sprint merger. So I took care of I had many reasons for my own updates, so that way I could take care of quite a few things, but that way I could take care of what I needed to take care of while, giving the opportunity for others to. Now, if they chose to squander that opportunity, that's their fault. That's their problem, because I knew better. So, it's one of those, the formation of the U.S. Space Force, as far as that's concerned. And that's in 2020. NASA's been around for a few decades. There were a lot of videos that started coming out, modern, updated terminology. So it went from UFO to UAP to whatever other alphabet soup sort of acronym of whatever 3 to 5 letters regarding. And so, just is as it is, there started coming out reports in reference to other situations. Some of the streaming services had started having videos available as far as, now I don't know when these were produced, but you have the Big Blue Book or the Blue Book Project, and those different aspects. You have different reported situations that have been verified, and so you have this in 2020. Well, this is 2022. And so I was updating my journal blog, and I thought that it would be more pertinent to get some of that clarified and verified, not just in reference to the situations regarding the validity in reference to my Medal of Honor art project, artwork, the validity in reference to quite a few other situations, obviously my scuba diving, in that particular reference regarding the Vandenberg area. There is the facts apparently as to General Hoyt S. Vandenberg in reference to some of the work he and his individuals had worked on. And so then you have those factors in conjunction to my work regarding my updates, my scuba diving style, the background to my scuba diving style, because individuals who wouldn't have that particular background as far as the actual knowledge would not be capable to know. So when I made my Periscope video, as far as that is concerned, associated with Twitter, and saying, I challenge, here you go, this is my challenge though. Well, I didn't lay out the rules of what the challenge would be. So here you go, because nobody had responded. Okay, fine, so here's this. All right, well, I know that no one could see me when I was down there at all. There wasn't the capacity to, because of what I had already explained in discussions, as well as wrote and compiled in Finding A and Finding the Silver Lining, 2 of my books, if you go to my book section on my website, www.susanmealing.com. And so, okay, I know that the average, and then there's the facts that you can only have so many people in the area regarding that anyway. So then there's that situation, plus the depth level. Okay, fine. How do I clarify and verify? I know how to. Well, there was a hurricane during the time frame. There was the Periscope video where, here, yeah, that's that way. It'll be this and this. It'll go, it's supposed to be this, but, I'm going to move this, whatever, this way. Literally showing videos of me doing so. But, people who would be ignorant and not actually know anything, they wouldn't pay attention to the fact that I was literally showing them moving the clouds in the videos. They would have their ignorant and wishful thoughts, because they would have their ignorant and wishful thoughts. Literally would have shown in those videos, as far as Periscope is concerned, the day before I went to the Vandenberg, where my son, my daughter, my niece, and the dolphin excursion boat captain situation where I moved the hurricane, I literally showed that, but there were a bunch of lack of individuals who actually spoke with me. In the state of Texas, though, fine, I guess you'd actually also have to be honest when speaking with me, with etiquette and respect, to acknowledging that. So, those Periscope videos that at that time in 2019. But those particular situations for those individuals to take in consideration. Hi, E equals MC squared. Hi, maybe you could notice that in the background of those Periscope videos of my account, Aurora Mealing. Hi. So that's what I did. And so then in 2020, I went and swam-ish in the, Kitty Hawk area during the Bethlehem Star, and anybody who knows anything about astrology and the energetic pull of the different orbiting areas, so not just the orbiting of the Earth around the Sun, and the orbiting of the Moon around the Earth, and the orbiting of the other planetary alignments. As far as those different poles, gravity, sure, if you want to consider that, but that is the reality in physics. So the situations in regards of going out to the Kitty Hawk area, and that's in December of 2022, and 2021, there were a couple of areas-ish, but more so in January and February of 2022, in New Jersey and New York, regarding the Atlantic area of the ocean. And so, clarifying and verifying, because having the common sense and the knowledge of, but those common sense factors. So then there's the merging situations, and so here, let me do this clarification and verification, because I know what a merger is, and anybody who, more so in the late 1980s into the early 1990s, I don't remember the names of the company that had merged in I think it was mid to late 1989, 1990, they had merged together. There was a whole bunch of stuff that came out. It was a huge whatever. in 1994, 1995, there was another company merge that had occurred. And so all this stuff had come out in the news. And then 1997, 1998, and 1999, you have the Y2K situation that was going on with the stuff that was happening in the news at the time frame. So then everything went the way it did. And since then, you have cell phone companies. And so it started out with Sprint had been around for a while. And Sprint is the only company that pretty much has stayed on its own. It's more well known for certain backgrounds of certain individuals compared to others. And so then there's Verizon, and Verizon pretty much has stayed Verizon, though AT&T has, 25% in Verizon or so. And so then you have AT&T itself. AT&T also made T-Mobile before T-Mobile had become its own, but it's still created by AT&T. Not necessarily owned, but created by. So there's certain coding. And so T-Mobile and the one company, Sprint, which is the only company that had remained on its own. The only one. And so while all the other cell phone companies, MCI, are they're different with different acronyms, had their own cell phones, while landlines, some people still have landlines, however they are. But you have everybody who has a cell phone at some point in time. And so with that, you have to take that into consideration. And so with the facts that AT&T has been a part of Verizon for however long, because it's essentially AT&T came out with the only phone that nobody else had, and that's the iPhone. iPhones were, for those who don't know, iPhones for the longest time were only capable with one program company. That was it. It's kind of, it had its own line. It had, the iPod and obviously iPhone, then there's the Apple Mac computer and sort of stuff. So it had its own specific line. That's it. Only after a while did other cell phone company carriers begin to work with, because of the way it was done. It's exclusive. It's the original. It's the one and only. And so sure, it can kind of what have you with other, but it's the one and only. It's the original. And so when you take in consideration how whatever time frame it was that Verizon was allowed to have iPhone, and their company to actually, they had to reroute the cell phone towers for certain programming. Additionally, in reference to software, so it's both software and hardware for the iPhone to be capable to be utilized. The situations in reference to the iPhone to T-Mobile, that was already automatic in those references. Then, whenever those mergers happened, is when you have to look at that, as far as the situations during those time frames, as far as what started coming out, as far as information, because those who understand how certain things are when it comes to merging, sometimes if, you have to, when it comes to the fabric being blended together, I guess is a way to put it, certain things just kind of fall into place, and that information just clicks. And so, if certain things were done in a more timely manner in reference to certain hypotheticals. Other situations would have been easier in comparison. So now you have the merging capacities. So Verizon has whatever streaming services. I don't know if they work with Dish Network or because I know that that's a situation. You have AT&T, which has Uverse or whatever television aspects in the conjunction, similarly to Verizon as to the cell phones. However, AT&T had all types of cell phones as well as the exclusivity of the iPhone. So where other companies, no matter what they were, had whatever aspects of whichever cell phone, AT&T was the only one that had the iPhone for years. And so that's a situation regarding the updates, because that's the facts. And so those who understand that there are certain social media platforms that are automatically in the cell phone. For some you have to download it, but it doesn't take long to download it for a reason. For those who have downloaded certain apps for social media, think about the ease of downloading the app, and then think about the program coding that you may or may not necessarily understand, but would have the capacity to understand how quick it moved. And so, those situations. So the individuals that I made attempts to clarify and assist in those references, well, those times went as those times went. If the situations were actually at high speed in comparison to what I was dealing with, well, those situations would be different right now in the year 2022. However, since other people thought they knew whatever they thought they knew and assumed whatever they assumed in this hypothetical, those people would have to deal with that acknowledgement. So in that reference of Hurricane Dorian and those particular different Periscope videos, those types of people that failed to pay attention to the correct details, in my opinion, those people would be the ones who would be ignorant, because they already had the information in reference to finding a silver lining. So any ignorance was by choice on those people's parts, hypothetically, because of having already verified. So if the arrogance as to those types of people, because they would think more highly of themselves in comparison because of whatever haughtiness that they had, or what have you, that's just what they have to deal with. So now in 2022, we're from the time frame of 2019 to now, they could have had the luxury of clarifying in the correct capacities in this time frame of the 12th of May 2022. There's the merger on the 6th of June 2022. And so here's where it gets intricate. So all of the people that in this hypothetical that they know from whatever time frame of whatever situation is what it is as far as their choices. I am the least of concerns in those particular references, because yes, I have my experiences, my background, what I would know. I don't know those people. That was a choice they made. And so in those references, they know who they know. They don't know who they don't remember, though. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I acknowledge that I had a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain that took 8.5 years to fully dissipate out of the MRI and CAT scans. I acknowledge that sure, there probably could have been certain impacts, pun intended, in certain references. In other references, obviously, other regarding in reference to my scuba diving in 2009. And, you know, those civilian recreational scuba divers that had made whatever choices those civilian recreational scuba divers made. Same thing in reference to anybody at those times. So I haven't ever spoken with anybody in depth, pun intended, about my scuba diving. Anybody that's had whatever discussions is whoever they had those discussions with. Nobody ever spoke with me about my scuba diving in that context. Nobody asked me about my pictures. Nobody asked me anything. If anybody asked, they asked whoever they asked, and they didn't ask me. I'm the only person that they should have asked. However, that would be common sense instead of what occurred. So then you have the other situations as far as how simple it really truthfully would have been. So if you take in consideration different events that I had been to, well, it's common sense that I was at whichever events. It's also common sense how certain types of people are, especially in the state of Texas. And so those types of those people, if they are honest with themselves, they can take in consideration why I wouldn't speak about my particular specifics to my background in reference to my style of scuba diving beyond what I already had, because responsible aspects. And so those types of those civilian recreational scuba divers, being the way they were, have been the way they were, and that's the way it is. So those types at those times with those egos and haughtiness during those times were as they were. They could have just asked me and had actual discussions, but those types as to how they were, no different than the videos in regards of the time frame during Hurricane Dorian at all. There's no difference. You know, I had gone back, and here's 2019, where the same thing, where they could have spoken with me, but their choices were as their choices were instead. Those types of those people. So in reference to the merger, those types of those people, those situations, brought up the election integrity information, went over various details where these individuals that I was around in whatever capacity of, these situations were important in reference to Washington State. But those people, such as my biological mother and or biological father and or biological sister and or ex-in-laws, in regards of their associated aspects, those childish, immature, irresponsible types, as to what those people with whatever their choices were as to their particular failures. That's their fault for their choices. They know at this point in time, in this hypothetical, there is less than a full 30 days in regards of that merger between the T-Mobile and Sprint situations. That does not include the merger of AT&T with T-Mobile and Sprint, just as that doesn't include the merger between Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile and Sprint. Just as that doesn't take in consideration of all other types of cell phone companies of whatever type, whatever name, whatever brand, with the AT&T, Verizon Wireless, T-Mobile, and Sprint merger. So anybody who was around during the time frame, more so in the mid to late 1990s, when a lot of programs were occurring as far as different upgrades, updates, and mergers, in the 1994-ish time frame to 2000, for those who were really into technology, coding stuff, and companies, you would know certain situations that occurred. And that is on a small scale in comparison. Now, especially when you take in consideration how many more devices in comparison to that time frame of the 1990s. So I've been working on merger details of explanations, but I've also been doing updating and clarifying because these situations have been important. So I'm the least of those people's concerns. It's everybody else that they've known. So while in certain references, that is as it is, it kind of is as it is. So where I've clarified and verified, gone into the details, sure, I've had to put the wording more accurate because of various situations I've dealt with. Well, those individuals during the time frame of 2019 through possibly even now in 2022, they've had the option to speak with me. When I was in the state of Texas in regards of 2019 through 2021. That was their choice. I made the option available, and if they chose not to do so, as they chose not to do so, in regards of certain individuals, well then, that's the choice. It's the reality. So any accuracies that I have proven and clarified and verified removes those types of individuals as to their wishful thoughts compared to what's for my best interests. So, for example, there was a situation regarding on the way to the Georgia Guidestones. And I had to contact the insurance company, I put it in writing, all this sort of stuff. Those that have had other verifications and clarifications have those details. So that's where my ex-in-laws relinquished what rights they didn't have to begin with. That's where my biological mother, biological father, biological sister, and connections of relinquished the rights that they didn't have any right to begin with. Because those particular situations that actually could have been much more elevated in a more positive way in that hypothetical regarding 2019, 2020, and 2021, those types of those people with their arrogance and their haughtiness, again, the prime outlets exit 200 as far as the Starbucks, and those pretentious types. So that's what it is. They don't have those options because there's none left. They have all the people that would know, whoever that they can remember. As far as that's concerned. So we're in the update time frame of 2019, 2020, and 2021. If they had been intelligent, it would have been swift across the board. Not nitpicked, not any of that. It would have been direct. But those people in the hypotheticals as to the civilian recreational scuba divers regarding my scuba diving, I'm the only person to speak with. So going and asking anybody else is ignorant in the year of 2009 onward. Anybody who would think that they could ever speak on my behalf about my scuba diving has absolutely no idea about how scuba diving actually is. So either they got into scuba diving and they went directly towards the instructor route and they have no idea what actual scuba diving is, or they're civilian recreational scuba divers who go to look at something and have absolutely no idea. And then there's military scuba divers, there's law enforcement scuba divers, there's fire department scuba divers, there's EMS scuba divers, and how my scuba diving is, which is as it is. So, those particular factors. And so, sure, you could ask in reference to what other people's experiences. That's not my experiences. You could go and ask other people of their background, but that's their background. My background is my background. And so if you go and ask other people who weren't around me during the time frame of when I was working, well, then you asked people who weren't around me when I was working. So, for example, if you were to ask my biological mother and or biological father and or biological sister, ask them when they were at the beach with me. If they tell you the truth, which would be not ever or maybe once or twice regarding my biological parents, my biological sister, not ever, well then that's the facts. The reality. And so, for example, my biological sister did not go through Marlboro Recreational Camp. So she did not go through the weeks at the beach. I was a camp counselor. She would have been in one of the groups. Dropped off at the exact same time. She wasn't. So she didn't grow up going to that. It's common sense. So my biological father and or biological mother, whichever one, would take me to be driven to where I was working. My biological sister was not in the same camp. That would have been because of the way it was arranged. So don't pretend my biological sister and I had the same childhood. Those people, as far as those types, have been as those people have been. So then you have the state of Texas. You know, as far as the San Antonio pagan community, and those references. That's what I've grown up dealing with in reference to my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister this entire time. Don't pretend that they've ever actually been my family. Don't pretend they've ever actually treated me as family. Don't pretend those people ever actually cared about me and or my best interests. Don't pretend those people are decent human beings any further. Because obviously, they wouldn't know a decent human being if they were standing in front of them face to face in person. Obviously. So, that's just the facts. However, regarding coding, you have these mergers. So all those people as far as New Jersey and Illinois and Texas and then Washington State, because of how I wound up there, you know, anybody who claims that they spoke with, well, I'll verify that. I'm capable to verify if you actually speak with me in truth. So I know for a fact whether or not I've been at an event, depending on the type. I've clarified and verified that through my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com. So I have no problem clarifying and verifying. So if there are situations in the state of Texas and or the United States of America, I warned people that I knew in person, face to face in person, as to what I was dealing with regarding those people. And that includes my ex-in-laws, as well as my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister, and those connections. So those types of those people have been as those types of those people have been. My style of scuba diving, the civilian recreational scuba divers, well, you know, you made whatever choices you made. So you made the choices you made, and then there's what is supposed to be considered the consenting adult lifestyle. And that translates to everybody has to have that. So for anybody who's a Democrat, well, you have to have everybody, not just one or two people, not even a majority. You have to have everybody actually be informed to make that decision. You can't have a council meeting where you don't have someone representing themselves by law. In the United States of America, it doesn't matter which state, the individual has every right. So if you don't give that right, you don't have that legally allowed in the United States of America. So if you don't have an actual trial that is actually within the confines of the law, you don't have the same rights. When it is a general overall community, supposedly, regarding the supposedly consenting biological adult lifestyle, you're supposed to have an actual informed aspect in comparison to the hypotheticals of. So I was accused of stirring the pot. That's what I was accused of. I didn't ever stir the pot, though. I warned people of this. So I was accused of stirring the pot because of what I was dealing with. People were actually angry at me for what I was dealing with in comparison to being angry at the fact that I was dealing with what I was dealing with and being angry at the individuals who caused those problems. That was where I didn't understand why I would ever have to deal with that. Because even something as simple as the after effects of my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, I dealt with people who got angry at me for what they thought about speaking with me. Whereas if they had been honest instead regarding if they had spoken with me before, then they wouldn't have had to hear me repeat myself. But since they made the choices to not do so, because of whatever their opinions were, 10 Commandments would have made it easier. However, in those particular references, that was their choices. So they had no right to actually be angry at the after effects that I personally deal with. So I deal with the headache pain. I deal with the migraine pain. I deal with the memory deficits. And while yes, when it comes to other people having the explanation of, they don't have to deal with my memory deficits though. Because I'm the one who has to put it all together. And I'm the one who deals with the cognitive disorders. Those people don't. They just, that's the facts. So when they have whatever details, they have whatever details, and that's their fault for being ignorant by their own choice. So they don't have the right to be angry with me. They have the right to be angry as to how my head injury happened. They have the right to be angry as to every situation that I dealt with, because they should be angry at the individuals who made the choices they made. That would be common sense. So then you have the situations regarding what I dealt with as far as my pregnancy and delivery and raising of my son and my daughter. I've dealt with people being angry at me for stuff that's not my fault when they should be angry at the situation as to how that occurred. They should be angry at the individuals who knew at the time, and those factors when it comes to the stuff with my daughter and my son as far as school is concerned. They should be angry at the school. They should be angry at the volunteers. They should be angry at the staff. They should be angry at the parents that knew and what have you. They should be angry at those children in comparison to my son, my daughter, and I. Those people should be angry at the school boards, the law firms, and all that in comparison to my son, my daughter, and I. We didn't do anything wrong. That was all those people and their choices. Then, as far as the situation regarding my scuba diving, well, be angry at all of the civilian recreational scuba divers who decided to speak with anybody except for me. Or, conversely, be mad at the civilian recreational scuba divers who could have scheduled an appointment for me to speak with someone, but because of their choices as civilian recreational scuba divers was their choices. Instead, there's nothing to be mad at regarding myself. It's everybody else's choices that you have to be mad at. Because I could only do so much. Then, in reference to, what is supposed to be considered as the consenting adult lifestyle, be angry at those people who made the choices in comparison to actually speaking with me. Be angry at the individuals who chose to go to events just to stir up needless drama in comparison to the way I did, which was to just socialize. Be angry at those people who stirred up drama by pretending the way they did. Don't be angry at me, be angry at them. I didn't do that, they did. So it's common sense. So you have my journal blog, the Ornery PSA updates. And on my website, www.susanmulang. And there's all these situations that occurred. Well, you have all those people to be angry at. That's their fault. That's what they chose to do in comparison. So then there's how I wound up in Washington State. Well, be angry at the people who decided to make the choices they made. I spoke the truth. All that had to occur was people speak with me in truth. It's very simple. But because of the way things went. And so, those situations in the hypothetical. Then there's my Medal of Honor, our project trips. So, those particular references and a few other situations that I've gone over in detail. And so, those situations, anything as far as what's supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle compared to, because those millennial types, in comparison, because, well, why would I know if somebody knows me or not, or recognizes me, unless they actually say something with etiquette and respect instead. So, was as it was as far as that's concerned. And that would be on them, not on me. So, like, for example, when I wound up in Washington State, there were some events in Portland, Oregon. Well, why not just speak with me in truth instead? It's a starting point, especially when it comes to what's supposed to be considered as the adult consenting lifestyle. It's just honesty. Especially if there were those from the state of Texas who decided to stick their nose in business that wasn't theirs to stick in to begin with. Because of those immature types that didn't have any human decency to begin with. Because if they had human decency, well, they would have spoken in truth with me. In person, face to face in person. From the starting point. Because it's in person, face to face in person. That matters, especially. So if you start off speaking with me in person, face to face in person, in any other way than in truth, well then what does that translate to? Why would you ever expect anything if you decide that you're going to break the 10 Commandments in person, face to face, in person with me in truth? That's your choice, to break the 10 Commandments. but you are informed not to. So you don't have any ground to stand on at any point in time, ever. I started out in truth. If you chose to whatever, and additionally, if you didn't know that I picked up on energy despite explaining and other factors, that's on you. That's your fault, especially if you know of certain types of energetic, what have you, and you choose whichever, that's on you. That's your fault. You know better. You know how that is. And so those types of those people with those situations, now there's the merger. Well, okay, I know that I've been known by many names. I also know that only certain individuals knew me as these names. I know where, I know how, I know the overall aspect. So I've done this time frame of clarifications and verifications because I know. And so, yes, for certain aspects, my modeling being Lady Dory Bell, but not denying Susan Milling, explaining that. So I know who I met with, different situations, different individuals, overall locations, time frames, so on and so forth. Contracts as well, if any were signed. I know what I signed with because I know how that goes. You know, to make sure. I know how I sign date in reference to, and I know my signature per year. Won't ever be the digital version, I'm talking about hand, for my modeling. Didn't ever do any signatures regarding performances, just for clarifications. So there's only, throughout the entire time in the state of Texas, there are 3 contracts I signed. And that's it. And it was what they were during those times. So for one was in Austin, and it was for 1 session, and that was it, nothing more. In the DFW area were 2. And they were the motorcycle shoot and the airport shoot. That's it. No other paperwork was signed. Just for clarifications. So, very particular. I'm a little bit CDO, and so any of those clarifications and verifications that were accurate to the percentage of would be capable to go into that. And so in reference to Washington State, that was a 5 pieces of paper, only 1 side, and only 1 signature for 1 page, which anybody who knows anything about legalities, you have to get that every page. It's not 1 page of whatever. And so then only what's on that 1 page is considered as valid because of the way that is. If you don't have a signature per page, you don't have a legal binding contract. Guardian assholes. But you know, those types that think they know certain things, they, you know, don't realize certain factors. So, you know, that's a fun little thing that you have to actually know law. So if you don't know law, you actually don't understand that. And there are certain ways you have to do it, and it's for anybody who knows legal situations, you have a lot of sticky notes as to all those signatures, each and every type. Very particular about that. So there hasn't ever been a time where I signed any other contracts, just for clarifications. I know what I have
because I've had to pay attention to that. I knew certain types of certain people. And so, those situations to make sure. So anybody who claims otherwise, there's those clarifications. It's important for those details, especially when it comes to the guardian asshole situation. That one page of one signature doesn't matter what's on the other pieces of paper, because it's not a signature on all those other pieces of paper. It's so important to know your legal aspects, because if you don't know the legal situations, well, then, you tend to cost that particular group of whatever what you cost them. Because you'd have to do that correctly. And that's just for Washington State in that one location, not in other areas because of legalities. Washington State is a Democrat state, especially Seattle, Tacoma. There's so many legal aspects that unless you actually have a background knowing that. So I'll give a reference. My son, I decided to take him to Temple Beth Philo in Olympia. And when driving in, I said, I want you to know you can't ever complain about how many questions I ask about your day at school. And my son looked over at me when I was driving. He goes, what do you mean? I said, this will be a saving grace for you to keep in mind. And my son goes, well, why? You just need to pay attention that this detail that you are going to learn now will be important in the future for you. And he, okay. I said, so you won't ever be capable to complain because I don't ask you that many questions when you get to this point. So remember this for when it's important. So I've given the reference of signature. Okay? So my son and I go into Temple Beth Philo, and he goes and gets to meet some yentas and yadis, and I let him know that was like a couple of however many hours for school. And so that situation, we had fun. It was during Purim. And so I informed my son about all that, and it was as it was. And so those particular factors, and so those legal pieces of paper, so important. Because those who don't know about that, well, you have to know a few things. So you have to sign each piece of paper. And there are certain types of situations where you have to know which exact clause you have to additionally sign an area of. Because if you don't, those particular contracts are null and void if you don't know anything. And so then you have these situations where, if you don't know what you're paying attention to, such as certain types that would be in a different state that would think their state would be an overall. So, okay, I went back to the state of Texas. 2019, well, Texas law, compared to New Jersey law, New York City law, or Pennsylvania law, or New York State law too, but especially New York City law. Yeah, you can't touch those laws because you have to know those intricacies. So people in the state of Texas, you could even be in Austin, you could be in Houston, you could be in DFW, San Antonio, but yeah, you can't touch those laws. Just look at the construction building requirements as far as the difference. So then, up in Washington State and all that, you can't use Texas law up in Washington State. You don't have that legal background. Somebody who was born and raised in New Jersey, growing up going to New York City and New York State, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania area, I could very easily, without any hesitation. And anybody who would think whatever they'd think, well, that's whatever they'd think. That would be, those situations. So in the modern day book, I clarify some stuff. You can see it in my book section and my website, www.susanmeling.com. So those particular factors of the Washington state, well, someone in the hypothetical in the state of Texas would think ignorantly that they could have that type of a contract. You can't. You yourself actually have to physically be up in the Washington state area at the same table. They don't allow certain by proxies. It's mandatory. If you have somebody else as a representative and you don't inform them, any contract that's signed is automatically null and void. They physically have to be in the same exact area, have to sign at the exact same time, and there wasn't any of that. So it was only one piece of paper, and I already explained that. Those types of individuals that have caused a bunch of needless drama wouldn't ever think of that. They'd have their opinions that they would think that they would know better, and they wouldn't. No different those civilian recreational scuba divers, because of the hypothetical lies my biological mother, biological father, biological sister, and ex-in-laws told. I took Greco-Roman Latin, and that was fun. So, okay, sure, I have arithmetic problems. That has nothing to do with Greco-Roman Latin. That's common sense. So, again, though, people doing those sorts of needless problems, well, that's that. So individuals who would try to get a specific response, well, that's your ignorance for not just being blunt to the point and honest when asking. That's your fault, not mine. Especially in those hypotheticals. So then there's, sapphire and all that stuff. So, individuals contacting in comparison to speaking with me when I'm there. That's against the actual legal paperwork that Sapphire would have, because there's no reason, there's no cause, and there's no excuse for anybody at Club Sapphire to ever speak with anybody outside that's in my life. There's no excuse for them to have contacted anybody at any time. So if Ruby and or Doug and or Deb and or Ray and or anybody in the direct aspects of Club Sapphire had contacted people from the state of Texas and or my son, who again was a minor, and or how my son and I wound up in Washington state, that's a different problem now, isn't it? Because why would you be contacting and, okay, yes, I had been honest. It doesn't change the fact, though, why are you involving yourself in that way? You don't have any legal right. You don't have any legal authority whatsoever. So Ruby had explained she had done some paperwork regarding Doug. And Doug didn't know it about the whatever. And I let her and Doug know I wouldn't ever allow certain things because I would take a stand against you if you were to ever do anything in that capacity. And I told Doug to go and get himself legal assistance. I informed Ray as far as what occurred regarding what Ruby had said. Because that sort of needless drama is exactly that. So I didn't sign any paperwork that would ever allow that. Because I know better. And so any false accusation that I dealt with before I wound up in Washington State, then there's that. And so updates and clarifications and verifications through my journal, blog, the Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com. And so there's no reason, there's no cause, and there's no excuse for anybody from Club Sapphire to have ever contacted the individual, as far as Jesse Leroy Hoover Jr., or my son at any point in time whatsoever. There was no legal right, no legal authority to do so. So, if in that hypothetical of, then there's those problems regarding those types. Because that trifling type of stuff. Because again, there's one and only person to speak with. Nobody else. You speak with one and only person. And that sort of arrogance and ignorance. Because if it was in regards of Club Sapphire, individuals being confused as to the business cards that Ray said was okay for me to put up, I explained and everything like that. If those people had an issue, they should have just spoken with me and I'd have clarified it. However, just as similarly as one evening where Ruby decided to have an attitude when she was talking with Dusty, Rich, and Doug in the lobby area, and I looked at her and I said, I don't have to actually volunteer. And she laughed, and Ray jumped up and was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I had said, no, I don't have to tolerate that. I will not tolerate that either. Good luck finding one person to handle each and every aspect that I actually do. Ruby, Zahn, I think is the last name, she had, no, go ahead, good luck. You will spend so much more and you don't even realize it. By the time you actually do, you'll see what I've actually been taking care of all by myself and how little you have ever had the common courtesy to even say thank you in genuine appreciation. Thanks. So that's the reality. Ray had to calm me down and was like, no, I can't run this club without you. This is no, and it's like, no, I understand, but I won't tolerate certain things. Don't make the mistake of me assisting with volunteering as anything else. It is quite dominant to take that work and handle it. It is not something that is of any other capacity. So, similar to those club femme types who didn't understand that in order for those submissive males in the kitchen to get stuff taken care of, it was all pure dominance in those references. Well, you have all of that regarding the reality. So any Thanksgiving dinner afterwards in regards to Club Femme in Austin, if they didn't have a caterer, like in that time frame, Lady Robin didn't have, she ordered the food and it was supposed to be cooked and I took care of everything. I made sure that the submissive males did as they were supposed to do. I got the turkey squared away, 2 turkeys squared away, got them unfrozen so that way they can be cooked. You were allowed to eat that night because of me. That's what you were allowed that night. Because if I didn't take care of it, you wouldn't have been allowed to eat anything at all, except for what was brought in. You wouldn't have had any of the plates arranged the way they were. You wouldn't have had even the chairs arranged the way they were. But for those who actually have the finances to pay to have all of that in comparison, well, that's what you have. So at that time frame regarding Lady Robin and getting that stuff taken care of to assist, I also didn't know that Club Femme was only that type. So I was educated later and just didn't bother involving. However, in those references regarding Washington State, if in that similar viewpoint of thinking that volunteering is whatever opinion of, well, someone who steps up to the plate and handles stuff, doesn't do certain things certain ways, actually make sure it's done correctly and consistently done correctly. Well, that's not a dominant that you don't pay attention to. That is the dominant that you learn from. In comparison, but you better pay respect in those references. So, I'm sure there were plenty of unattached males who may have complained because I didn't allow unattached males in the back. There could have also been unattached females who complained because I wouldn't allow them to linger in certain references. There could have been couples that could have complained because I wouldn't tolerate certain things and would make sure things got taken care of swiftly. And it is what it is. There could have been those who appreciated stuff. I know there's one that I could think of, and that's just as it is. So those particular individuals, as far as those situations are concerned, that's just in the back. That's not even forgetting as far as remembering the towels, the situations of. Then there's the refilling of stuff, picking up stuff, making sure, doing a mom sort of thing and certain references. And that's just the back. That's not forgetting the bar area. Because, I guess it works out because of the COVID. You can't have as many people in the location at the same time. Because, and then there's that. But then there's the bar, which would not be as crowded, of course, compared to before COVID. And so, those particular situations, the ice, the sodas, the different refills, the wiping down, making sure it's clear and all that stuff, making sure the food's squared away, bring out anything extra if needed, whatever, the situations in regards of the DJ and making sure whatever as far as that's concerned, and then the office, making sure that, here's this, take care of the Keurig and all that sort of stuff, all that work. But that's not something that just anyone. So while some people might have a certain viewpoint, if they don't have any understanding, no, that's an extremely dominant thing to do in comparison. To certain types of hypothetical viewpoints. So then you have the merging situations. And in those merging situations and tensions and clarifications and verifications and all that. And so, those who actually understand the way technology moves around as far as the different circuitry, because it's not just software and hardware, then there's the circuitry aspects. You have to have a different level on that. Because the circuitry boards, in comparison to the hardware and the software, well, that's different. The circuitry boards and how those particular pieces actually maneuver that information, that's different. Then there's the electricity, then there's the information technology, then there's all those capacities of. I have a sensation my outfit might make a little bit more sense right about now. And so, if you don't have that background, so for example, if you were not in the hardware department, regarding back in at the very latest, 1994, you just are allowed to know what you're allowed to know. So if you got into coding after the 2000s, you're just coding. The way the information works through the circuitry is extremely different than how it works through electricity. It's not even on the same wavelength. It's the equivalent of trying to compare dial-up to a cell phone hotspot. Good luck trying. You can have some metaphors, but when it comes to the speed, that's different. That's different. And so you've got the U.S. Space Force that was formed in 2020, and you have NASA that's been around for a while, and you've had Facebook that's been around, as well as FetLife and other social media platforms like Twitter and all that. That might make a little bit more sense additionally. And so, so then, those updates, those clarifications, those verifications, so very much important to all those details. And so, can't be the only one who's had certain situations. And so, how do you clarify and verify? Other than in truth, it's only through the truth that you can. So, situations went the way they did. And the individuals regarding the state of Texas that hypothetically involved themselves in regard to the state of Washington, well, I didn't ask for your involvement, state of Texas. Why would you have any? And then there's my scuba diving. Well, if you wanted to know, why didn't you ask me? It's kind of ignorant to go and ask everybody except for the one and only person to ask. It's additionally arrogant to ask anybody except for the one person to ask. It also shows how self-loving you are of yourself and those you know in comparison to asking the one and only person there is to ask. Been that way since for a while. So, but then there's additionally the after effects from my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. And, there's some, when you have certain situations where there could be witnesses, that's one thing. If there's only one person to ask, though, there's only one person to ask. It's common sense. What intellectual level do you have to be to have that understanding? I don't know who would need that explanation, that there'd only be one person to ask about my scuba diving. However, you'd also have to be willing to speak with me in truth. You couldn't just say something like, oh, well, I was in the Navy. Oh, well, good for you. Do you know how big the Navy is? Common sense. That'd be like somebody saying, well, I've gone scuba diving. Oh, well, so have a few people. And, which are actual situations. Or here's another one, I do this in the military. Oh, okay, well, cool. Thanks for your service. All right then. And, or here, here, my dad's in the government. Well, it's kind of a big area. Don't know if you know that or not, or, here's so-and-so, they're in the media. Oh, well, okay, well, you want to specify a little more than that? No, you just want to say the media. Okay, awesome, okay. So, right? Or you could just be truthful and tell me in truth in comparison. So there was a female who had been in the Sapphire, and she's like, oh, I work for Facebook. Oh, well, again, that's kind of... Now, granted, okay, in that one I haven't directly worked in Facebook. I will acknowledge that. I will. I have posted a lot. I do acknowledge that. And there's my original Facebook account. And then there's my original Lady Doribel account, which is the what have you. It'd be all on the same computer and stuff like that. But that is as it is. And so, yeah, which, again... I could make a joke, it's a perfect outfit. And so, and I'm not even getting into the fabric aspects, I'm just talking about the color. Because if you know certain things about you gotta have some old school coding, understanding, to understand the particular references regarding the pattern fabric. As far as how that goes, it's, it's certain types. Hi. I'm this much of a dork. Yes, I am. And so, if you only knew back then, huh? And so, so then there's that merger situation as far as that's concerned, and here's the clarifications and verifications and what truth and all that sort of stuff. So then there's that. Yeah, so, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. Yeah. And those, those situations of the streaming and stuff like that. Yeah. So there's that, but it is what it is because truth. But yeah, so, what tangled webs we weave, double, oil and trouble. As far as these hypotheticals, because if that merger idea really, in the time frame just before, that's a lot of merging and a lot of stuff to take in consideration regarding, it's why the Ten Commandments are so important. Which is kind of funny because from what I've seen of Zuckerberg, he kind of almost looks like Captain Pagata. Almost like what Captain Pagata had looked as in Medical Hold Unit. Or what a relative of Captain Pagata would be. Kind of looks like that, a smidgen. Because he doesn't look like Captain Cupcake, and he doesn't look like Captain Beer. Captain Beer, he almost, I don't know, Captain Beer could almost, maybe a relative to E equals MC squared. I could see that. And then Captain Cupcake.
Captain Cupcake would kind of be like more like Tom Cruise-ish, from what I remember, but almost like the Twitter guy mixed with if you were to do Scruffy Scruffies. So here's the Jack guy. It's the Captain Cupcake. And so... But Captain Pagata definitely would be Zuckerberg. I could see like a relative of Zuckerberg. So yeah, that'd be kind of funny. As far as that's concerned, though the 2 brigade commanders, well, that'd be, well the, brigade commanders kind of, those would be the difficult ones to try to figure. Nonetheless, that was just in 2000 regarding Medical Hold Unit before it became Warrior Transition Unit. And so, look at that. The uniforms did it. That's what it was. The uniforms did it in comparison. So, civilian recreational scuba divers, you with your colors, and then civilians or, civilian clothing compared to the uniforms. Well, probably had other stuff to look at, comparison to focusing on what you physically looked as, hypothetically, especially if you're about, certain types of clothing, depending on the events. So there you go. If I'm fairly accurate regarding physical descriptions as to Captain Beer, Captain Cupcake, although his name, Captain Morning, Captain Pagata, well then, that probably has to do with the uniform and focusing easier. So, but yeah, Captain Pagata kind of looks like Zuckerberg, could be kind of related-ish, kind of, yeah. So, which he has the longest last name, which is the irony of Zuckerberg, as far as Pagata. And then Pagata Pagoda, instead of tomato. It's gotta, I just have to, because it was right there. I couldn't help it. It was literally just right there. The door was there. It just opened it and stuff, and it's right there. I couldn't help it. So, simple things. So yeah, so the merging capacities in reference to the software integrated obviously with the hardware. Well, then you have the circuitry boards, which are different from the hardware. And the circuitry boards are kind of the motherboard area. So, if you have that arrangement, then you have that understanding. So then in those references of these mergers regarding Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint, even though it's just supposedly T-Mobile and Sprint, all of these companies have to work together. As far as the different cell phone towers, the different G, as far as, which is an irony regarding movies I was allowed to watch as a child. And so, yeah. Ta-da. And so, there's those situations to think about. And so, in a few weeks, the merger is going to be completed, and so you have the reality of all of that starting point for the so for those who remember the 1990s, especially basically from 1994 to 2000, those different merger situations, like look at the biggest tech issues during those time frames, and that'll be a small version now. That'll be what that'll be, because that'll be much more. Because then also take in consideration the news that had poured outward because of all of the merging aspects. So, and that's kind of the situation, because how else? So that's what everybody has to look forward to in a few weeks. So, I guess. So, people can take that in consideration, referring to the reality of the merger. The 6th of June, 2022. And so, I was listening to Greg Gutfeld's show
and he was saying that some journalists had tried to compare the 6th of January to, and I don't know how you compare the 6th of January 2021 to 11 September 2001. Because this is what I have to say to those journalists that would ever have the audacity. First and foremost, those were human beings in comparison to airplanes and debris falling out of the sky. You were still capable to see, you were still capable to breathe, you were still capable to walk around. So those individuals regarding those types of journalists that would have the audacity to even try to make a claim that that would actually be to the level of, not even close at all. Not if you have actual understanding. So unless you consider all of those individual people as debris in comparison to human beings, you should probably think about how you refer to those individuals that were out in Washington, D.C. during the 6th of January 2021, because if you had that much of an issue with the individuals, and okay, I wasn't at the Capitol building, I acknowledge that, but everywhere I had been during that time frame of the 6th of January 2022, there wasn't really any issues. So just keep that in mind in reference to the news media, especially those commentators. Because if you're going to be reporting the news, then you should probably just report the news. If you're going to give your feelings, you should probably acknowledge that it's a commentary, or acknowledge that it's, those particular factors. Because additionally, I don't know how you would claim that you could ever have PTSD from a situation like that. Because unless you have certain aspects of, if you were at the 6th of January 2021, I didn't see anybody who had firearms, and were lying to each other. I did see law enforcement, but I didn't see what I saw in Austin, Texas, in regards of 2020 election rallies compared to Washington, D.C. I didn't personally see that. So, maybe those, because I'm sure that there are certain types of journalists who've had issues with others who have gone overseas and then come back to U.S. soil. And yeah, well, there's a different type of journalism. Just accept that. Certain types deal with certain things. So those who go out to the field and spend those times in those areas, they're going to have a different viewpoint. That's the reality in comparison. I wouldn't know personally. I didn't go to journalist school, but that's the facts. I would guesstimate. How else would you actually have the intel? So, the types of certain ones, that is, depending on what your specialty is, whatever your specialty is, regarding those tendencies. But if there are those who, I can't even, because when it comes to the 6th of January 2021 compared to 9/11/2001, you have no concept of anything, in my opinion. You have no common sense to ever compare the 6th of January 2021 to what occurred on the 11th of September 2001. You have absolutely no consciousness to actually compare. You have no background for any understanding, and you do not have the capacity in any way
to ever take that into consideration, in my opinion. But I'm biased because I was born and raised in New Jersey. I grew up going to the 5 boroughs of New York City, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, as well as Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So those types of those individuals, excuse my bias. However, I'm going to call you out on that. You don't have any right to even try to compare it in any way, in any shape, and in any form. So you're allowed to have your feelings, that's fine, but do not try to compare yourself in the slightest at all to the attacks on the 11th of September 2001. First and foremost, the 6th of January lasted literally one day. The attacks on the 11th of September 2001 took months to work through in comparison. So that's the starting point, where there is nothing in any way similar to that. One day compared to months? No. I will not allow that. I'll take a stand on that. Additionally, those people who would have any complaints regarding any situations. So, I've dealt with what I've dealt with. You can see how there are some situations that, yeah, maybe there's something that might co-align. However, what your entirety of compared to what my entirety of during whatever time frame of is obviously going to be different. So, in regards of certain types of people, sure, there can be some common aspects, though you have to remember all of the details. So my background is my background. My upbringing is my upbringing. And yes, I can relate to many individuals because of. But those types of people, in reference to what I've heard as to that similarity regarding the CNN news reporters trying to compare the 6th of January 2001 to the attacks on the 11th of September 2001, so 2021, January 6th to 11 September 2001, no, not at all. The first and foremost, other than airplanes going into buildings and debris falling from the sky with hundreds of thousands of people's lives compared to, and for one building, compared to the overall area of Washington, D.C., for this reference, you don't have any comprehension to start from. Secondly, you cannot compare that because people could actually maneuver in comparison to the 11th of September 2001. Third, the amount of lives that were capable to live compared to not. So, from the reports, there was one in reference to the 6th of January 2021, compared to the how many that are allowed to be known in reference to the 11th of September 2001. That's quite a bit of a difference. You should probably, as many news reporters claim to pay attention to statistics, you should probably actually pay attention to statistics. In my opinion, quite a bit over emotional, as far as that's concerned. Can't really compare. So those types that might wish to actually be along the same wavelength,
You're not even close. At all. I won't deny that you could have had uncomfort, okay? And? So what? Compared to the 11th of September 2001, the 6th of January 2021 was a walk in a park. Literally. And so, there is the fact that the Pentagon was hit as well on the 11th of September 2001. And so all of those people who could have seen that area in person, now I wouldn't have that background to that same level, but there are those who would. Similarly, in regards to where I was born and raised, growing up going to. So that, regarding the 6th of January 2021, is a way for some people, because of, hypothetically, if you review it a certain way, those who would understand this, maybe certain people didn't go back to the area of the DC, Virginia area after 2001, obvious reasons, because they would understand certain things. And let's say, in this reference, the 6th of January 2021, they get out there and they see whatever they see, but then time goes on. Well, similar to me in reference to February 2022, that's the first time for however many of whatever time, or maybe they've been there or whatever, it's a specific area, and those people can assist in those references regarding the actualities of 2001. In comparison. Because yes, most people paid attention only to the tri-state area. That's most people. I had paid attention to the overall aspect because of my knowledge of the subway system and travel systems. Not because of having been on them, because of knowing people. So, there are those facts. So, those situations. And so there's kind of the dichotomy in certain ways, where you have certain individuals who want to try to compare certain things or whatever their emotions or feelings or what have you. And then there are those who do have these connections. And this is why you end all types of stolen valor. Because in reference to my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanbling.com, in reference to the specifics of years, as to conscious awareness in these areas, most specifically for my reference, but not just my reference, for other references as to the overall area. So yes, I have the reference regarding New York City and the time frame. Well, there are those I would guesstimate that would have that capability in regards of the DC and Pentagon City area in comparison to me. And so those particular references of being capable to take a look at that, and that's important for clarifications and verifications. Because there's the 9/11 Commission that, wow, that went through real quick. That went through in how many years? I mean, sure, I understand some people wanted some, but would it be that it's called the 9/11 Commission because it had to do with 1993 instead? And so the 1993 would be the 9/11 Commission, but because of the time frame, that's the naming in comparison. Because I haven't read the 9/11 Commission report, I'll be honest. I wouldn't be surprised though if there were certain things, because when you take in consideration the 1993 attack, it was at the World Trade Center garage. Now, if it was at the World Trade Center Plaza garage compared to the World Trade Center garage, that's 2 to 4 different areas depending on the building, depending on the area. So if you have, as far as the 1993 attack, the world, so if it's the World Trade Center Plaza, which that would be on an exterior area compared to the World Trade Center. It's literally in the name. And so that would be a very different point as to the construction structure of the building. Anybody who knows that sort of, so you have in a reference point, you have the World Trade Center, and that World Trade Center will have certain size buildings that the structures rely on a proverbial reference of a spider webbing because of the electrical aspects to the World Trade Center Plaza, which would be much larger in certain capacities, obviously, as far as the dimensions. And so individuals who wouldn't have that background wouldn't know. So they'd think that it's the exact same thing when it's not. This is what I had brought up in the state of Texas. From 2001, pretty much, all the way through 2012. There were different people that I would argue with. So similarly, in reference to the report of CNN from Fox News, having said on Greg Gutfeld, if I remember correctly, the situation of CNN reporters trying to compare the 6th of January to the World Trade Center as far as 9/11, no, you're not allowed. If you want to try to compare that even to 9/11 in the DC area, then there's a whole other ball of wax on that. Because if these people want to try to actually compare the capital state situation to what occurred in reference to what happened at the Pentagon, so I wasn't personally involved in regards to those situations in reference to the individuals who came to speak with me that would understand that when my son was hospitalized and then when I was hospitalized during that time frame. So that's that. I don't know if they had anybody to do that for that area because of that sort of stuff. But you cannot compare that if that's the situations, because the Pentagon, from what I saw in regards of being out there in January of 2021, and even since then, because I've driven through a few times, that's a fairly secluded area. That's not something, I didn't see any grass at all. There's no, when I went out to the area, I didn't go all the way around, but the Pentagon out in the year of 2021, it's just a pure parking lot all the way around the entire Pentagon, except for one little spot, but that's it. There's no large lawn. There's just a lot of concrete. Didn't really see much. I saw grass in the park areas, but not near the Pentagon. The Pentagon had a parking lot all the way around it, and then roadways in comparison. So I don't know what the video footage is regarding the 11th of September 2001, but that would be something to take in consideration to those who would know those areas. Much better than I, obviously. Because I can tell the difference in reference to the New York City evening skyline from where I would know. And so there's a drone footage that I've been watching a little bit of. I had to take a break regarding a 3-hour or so video on YouTube, and I do not remember anywhere that had that much grass. I mean, even when I was driving through in 2022 and 2021, I had not seen so much grass in the New York City area. And because of what I was dealing with, it was one of those, well, let me make sure I don't overreact. And so, maybe, and because of the way my thoughts go, well, maybe I'm remembering something else and doing what I can to those comparisons, but no. Those areas, I know how that actually was, walking around those streets. Because I grew up walking around those streets. My biological father would have to park the car somewhere, and I haven't ever seen flat open parking lots in this city of New York. Anywhere. I haven't ever seen that. That's something that did not, like, you had the parking garages. The only areas that had flat, open area parking lots were places that had grocery stores, and that's it. Parking lot like that, other than that, would be for purchasing a car. You didn't have parks with grass. You had parks where you had swing sets and basketball hoops, but they didn't have grass really around it. It was concrete in all 5 boroughs, even in Manhattan. You had Times Square, which had some grass areas, but not much. I mean, I don't know what people thought of Times Square, but Times Square was really just buildings. It wasn't like there was a park. There are parks. There were some, Central Park, but if you really want to call that a park, the Beltway in DC would be more of a park than what was in New York City in the 1980s and 1990s. So I don't know what people would think would be the consideration of a park. It wasn't New Jersey, it wasn't New York State, it wasn't Pennsylvania. So go to inner city areas that have parks or whatever, or playgrounds, and the rest of it is cement. That's what you got. If you have grass around a playground in any state that's not New York City and it's an inner city area, don't ever consider yourself really that inner city. You're not that level. Because in the New York City areas in the 1980s and 1990s, you had certain areas where you literally actually had to pay to go into the areas to park. And it was in a parking garage. And then you literally paid to go see a tree. It wasn't like going to a botany location or an arboretum or anything like that. It was just to pay to see one tree. One little small patch of grass. You paid to see that. You paid whatever it took as far as the tolls. You paid whatever it was as far as the parking. And then, depending on where you went into, if you didn't go through one of the businesses, you paid to go see a tree and a little spot of grass. You're not at that level, and you really don't want to be at that level, and this is what I made attempts to explain to people in quite a few areas in Texas, but they thought that the Democratic policies were better. Yeah, no, that's what it is. I mean, you got California to look at, and those references as far as how that goes. But again, in reference to the CNN reporters that might want to try to compare the 6th of January 2021 to 11 September 2001, no, not even close. So let's say in regards of my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, or even my first 2 books, Finding a Silver Lining and Finding the Silver Lining. Let's say that was something that I wouldn't know because nobody told me. Well, if you want to try to compare that as a 6th of January 2021 compared to those 2 books being the equivalent of the reference of 11 September 2001, no, you don't get to complain and that metaphorical reference because it's not the same level. You could have feelings and whatever, but you didn't experience what I experienced personally. You didn't experience what my son and I experienced personally. You didn't experience what my daughter and or my son with and or I, because of the combination, experienced. That's what occurred. So while people can have certain experiences, that doesn't change the fact that this is what occurred. This is what was dealt with, and you cannot progress forward if you don't actually fix and repair situations correctly, no matter what. That's how that goes. That's why history repeats itself. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. If you learn from history, then you know you have 2 options. One, if you learn from history, you see other people repeat it. Or, if you learn from history, you have the capability of assisting others to learn from history and progress forward at the same time instead of repeating the same patterns of behavior. So when it comes to this merger, I wouldn't be surprised. In certain references, this is the way of everybody learning from history at the same time equally. And this is the situations of, and these are the clarifications and verifications. And those are what factors they are. So I've been open to discussions. I haven't ever closed myself off from discussions in an official capacity. It does require you being honest with me, though. And if you can't be honest with me in respect and etiquette, as I've dealt with, well, that's why you haven't gotten certain answers. That's on you for having gone to everybody else except for me. And that's on you for your choices during those time frames. Intentions, all that. So with the merger in less than 3 weeks, it's like maybe it's almost at 3 weeks. So the 12th of May 2022, the merger is the 6th of June 2022. just about 3 weeks, maybe a little over 3 weeks. It's what you got to look at regarding the facts to take in consideration. So I made attempts. You can be mad at yourselves though. You can be mad at the situations of what was caused as to what my son, my daughter, and I dealt with. But I did the best I could, as best as I could, in honesty. It's the big part. So, good luck. Because that's a whole different capacity. I don't really know what that would translate to for certain individuals to take into consideration. But that is as that is. So hopefully those answers and truth really come forward. Because justice in reality. Because, you know, if you choose to withhold evidence in comparison, that doesn't assist in justice. Obviously. You're not saving anybody doing that. You're causing needless problems, in my opinion. But, you know, people are as they are. Some people who just can't handle reality, they think that they know better when they don't, and they stir up needless drama. So, if people were just honest, straightforward, and to the point instead, it'd be so much easier for so many people, in my opinion, instead of fluffifying stuff. So, go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, and my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, has a bunch of the updating aspects, and then my books through Amazon. I'm going to be contacting them soon. However, I have a few things that just need to verify a few things because I know how certain things are. Don't want to cause any needless problems. So making sure as far as certain things are concerned, obviously, for those other situations regarding a lot. So you guys have a good day, because you know those guardian assholes situation verification. So that merger stuff, as far as the hardware, the software, all that, and then cell phones and streaming. And oh say, can you see by that dawn's early light what so proudly was hailed the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through that perilous fight of the ramparts were watched gallantly stream. Rockets' red glare, what bombs were the ones bursting in the air, but gave proof through the night that that flag is still there. Save us, that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Have a good day. 12th of May, 2022.